As the new year comes to a close, a new proposed climate plan aggressively aiming to push New York's emissions goals to zero. Hear from the state Senate Minority Leader on this climate push and his priorities for the new year. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. As the year comes to an end, a move from the state's Climate Action Council is already bringing some new concerns top of mind for the start of the next legislative session. According to the scoping plan, as it's called, the goal is to achieve 70% renewable energy by the year 2030, 100% zero emission electricity by 2040, and net zero emissions statewide by 2050. DEC Commissioner Basil Seggos says while the project will bring in jobs and improve the state's quality of life, it will be costly.
Well, listen, the state's going to need an enormous amount of funding, and we've known that from the beginning. Thankfully, we are at a period of time where you have the federal government, state, and localities all aligned from the government side. You also have the private sector engaged. You've got technologies ready for market, and you have the public, which is firmly in support of this plan.
And joining us now is New York Senator Rob Ord, representing the 62nd District here in the great state of New York. Senator, thanks so much for giving us some time.
Good to be with you.
Congratulations, first of all, on re-election. Congratulations on once again leading the Republican conference there in the Senate. So let's talk about what some of your priorities are heading into this new legislative session next month.
Well, our priorities remain unchanged, I think, from the last couple of years. You know, obviously, public safety remains a number one priority for us. People aren't going to do business. People don't want to live somewhere where they're not safe. We currently have a public safety crisis in various parts of New York State, whether it be New York City or the city of Rochester or lots of places in between. And that's partly in direct response to a lot of the policies and rhetoric that have come out of Albany over the past several years. So that remains a focus point for us to support not only those we represent, but to support those who we ask to protect us. Economically, you know, New York is facing a real affordability challenge. This is one of the most expensive states to live. In Albany, and you look no further than the Climate Action Council scoping statement that came out, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, those things are going to drive up costs on employers. They're going to drive up costs on farmers. They're going to drive up costs on average working families here in New York. And those are reasons why people choose to leave. It's why people, instead of putting their money in the economy, they try to keep more of their money. Again, it's why businesses leave. It's why businesses hire less people. It's why people leave this state. And that is a real issue. The exodus of people leaving New York is the single biggest threat to the future viability of this state. And so, you know, affordability, public safety are our number one and number two priorities. Obviously, there's you can break those out. You know, we look at education, that remains a real issue for our conference. I think, you know, looking at the challenges our farmers and agriculture industry face remains a major focus point for our conference. I'm certain this climate action scoping statement is going to be a major issue facing the state that the legislature will have to tackle. And I think that's a great microcosm for the affordability piece, as well as, by the way, an energy policy and an environmental policy that makes sense, that are practical, that move us forward without absolutely, the policy that is being put forward now is absolutely unachievable. It's unachievable, it's unrealistic, and it's unaffordable.
Well, let's jump right into that Climate Action Council announcement for a moment. You've been very outspoken about that. That's the most recent bit of news here. You represent a district where ag is a very large industry, and you've made comments where you feel that some of the things laid out in this green energy compact, if you will, is going to be a detriment to the state's farmers.
Absolutely. And this is on top of the Farm Fair Labor Act that was passed, that's going to increase their employment costs, their labor costs, on top of all the regulations regarding, you know, what kinds of fertilizers they can put on their crops, you know, how they actually farm. And it seems like the environmentalists, the radical environmental left has really targeted agriculture. They are not friends of agriculture. and they have made it certainly harder. Keep in mind, agriculture is still the #1 economic driver in the state of New York. It's not finance, it's not Wall Street, it's not movies, it's not any of this other stuff that we give out, a lot of tax breaks and incentives. It's agriculture. It is farming. And it's also, by the way, how we eat and how we, when you talk about grow New York, grow local, buy local, all these policies make it harder. And this climate production, farms use energy. Farms use, a lot of farmers are in rural areas. They're not all electrified. They're on home heating oil or propane or natural gas. And you're going to tell a farmer, when you've increased their labor costs and you've made it harder for them to farm and grow crops, and now you're going to tell them that they have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to convert their farmhouse, their operation to all electric. At some point, when other states aren't doing this, these farmers are going to say it's not worth farming here in New York, and that affects everybody who buys and eats food, which of course is all of us.
Now, the pact itself, we're looking at things, it's a grand scope, what was announced.
Yes.
Decades out, right? And I've heard some comments that say maybe it moves too quickly, but it seems like decades is an awful long time. And I think most...
It's not decades. It's not decades. For some of these policies, it's 2025. 2025 is not decades.
No.
That is a couple years away. So this idea that it's just, it's all happening in the future, that's not true. That is not what the scoping statement. The scoping statement calls for things to happen as banning gas appliances, new builds, all electrification. That's all by 2025.
Is this something you could get on board with if there were some grant funding, be it federal or state, to help them get to this point? Because I think most people can kind of get on board with being more energy efficient. What are some ways that they could go at it to make it a little bit more palatable, do you think?
So I want to start with the premise that most people are on board, because it sounds nice. We all want the environment to be here tomorrow. We all want the planet to be here tomorrow. Keep in mind that New York State's current emissions are 0.04% of global emissions. Now, unless you believe we can get to zero, which I don't think that's even possible, the market, the private sector market working with government, working, in conjunction, has lowered emissions substantially since the 1990s, when a lot of this effort started. So we're already at 0.04% of global emissions. None of what we're doing is going to obviously impact China or other states. So we're not even going to have the impact, meaning the benefit is not really going to be there. A lot of this to me is virtue signaling. New York's, we're leading on these issues, but we're not going to move the needle. But what it's going to do, it's going to drive people out of the state. It's going to increase the cost. You talk about the cost, grant funding. No one knows how much this costs.
Right.
They haven't said what the cost of this is. They absolutely have not said who's going to pay for it. Now, of course, the answer is we're going to pay for it. Somehow we're going to pay for it, either in tax dollars, or you're going to pay for it in your energy bills, or you're going to pay for it because you're the property owner. That's the reality. But they have not said, so we don't even know what grants we would need, federal or otherwise, because they haven't actually said what the cost of all these things are.
And hopefully we will learn the costs at some point. That would make things a lot more transparent here, wouldn't they? Senator Rob Ord, representing the 62nd District of New York State, sir, thank you for your time. As always, we appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys having me. Merry Christmas, happy holidays.
Well, it is the end of the year, and many are likely planning to start a new healthy habit in the new year, right? And only some of those habits actually take shape. Next, we're going to hear from a cognitive science expert on the best ways to keep up those New Year's resolutions. Remember, you got a comment, story idea you'd like us to follow, let us know. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly here in Albany. I'm Ryan Peterson. While it may be cliche for some, for others, at the end of the year, it's time to begin a new healthy habit as part of a New Year's resolution. According to data from a Marist poll, roughly half of Americans are likely to make a New Year's resolution for the coming year. A 2020 study from the National Library of Medicine found that just over half of those who make a New Year's resolution consider themselves successful in sustaining it a full year later. That study finds that people who looked to add a new habit were more successful than those who just looked to avoid an old one. All right, joining us now is Dr. Holly Traver. She's a professor in the Cognitive Science Department at RPI, giving us a better understanding of New Year's resolutions and why they often fail. Doctor, thanks for coming in. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about this. More than half of these resolutions, when people try to stick to them, fail. What are we doing wrong?
Well, the good news is that half of the New Year's resolutions succeed.
That is good
So
news.
if we can set ourselves up for success, then we are more likely to reach those resolutions. And the way to do that is by setting more realistic, more manageable resolutions. Because oftentimes we set those resolutions that are just so drastically different that change is very hard to maintain. So by setting goals that are challenging, yet progressively more challenging as we go along, we're more likely to reach those resolutions.
Should this be, it's tough for people to stick to things on their own. Speaking from personal experience, I do much better when I'm working in a group. Is this a good idea to maybe pursue a resolution as a small group with friends or family members?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. When we work on something as a team, as a group, we have that motivation to do well for our team members, and we hold each other accountable, and there's encouragement. In my positive psychology class that I teach, we talk about the importance of social relationships. For our well-being, social relationships are key. And so when we're tackling something that's challenging, if we can do it in a group, so for example, if it's an exercise program that you want to start, by doing it with others, that's ideal, because you have that encouragement, you have that motivation, and you have that holding each other accountable. So, like for instance, I just started playing pickleball this summer.
A lot of people have. Yeah.
Yes, they have. And I found a great group of people to play pickleball with. And when we play, we laugh, we joke, and there's all those positive emotions. And that's something that helps bring you back to continue with that.
Absolutely.
Is when you have those positive emotions around you.
And that was something that was so direly missing over the past couple years, right?
Yes.
That was a huge thing for everybody.
Yes, it was. And thank goodness at Rensselaer we're back in person. The students, that was really challenging to have to wear masks, and for everybody involved, you just didn't have that nonverbal communication with each other. That is so very important for just connecting with others.
Sure, and even that sense of being unsure of what's coming next, that just compounds the problem of trying to stick to a resolution, I would imagine too, right?
So yes, and when we set challenging yet realistic goals that we build upon and make more challenging as we go, we're more likely to stick to those. When it's too drastic, we're just like, that's just too much. And so we're more likely to stop.
So I came across this acronym, I believe I had sent this to you beforehand, called SMART.
Yes.
Goals that should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and T, time-bound.
Yes.
So go through a couple of those for us and kind of explain the relevance of them.
Okay. Each one is so important for goal setting. So in my classes, we talk about this, that when you set goals, you want them to be specific. So if it's a resolution to lose weight, that's a great resolution.
Sure.
And helping to stick with that is by setting more manageable or realistic, relevant to you. So you have to choose what weight is important for you, how much to lose each week. But you want it to be specific. So maybe it's half a pound a week for the next 2 months. So it's specific, it's measurable because you can step on the scale. It's attainable for you, if that's what is attainable for you. The relevant to you, that's what you chose, what's important to you. And so you want to choose those resolutions too that are meaningful, important to you. You're more likely to stick with those. And of course, the time bound. Time bound is very important because it helps keep you directed on your path towards attaining those goals. Because if it's just something in the future, I want to lose weight. well, maybe not today. So I'm going to have that piece of chocolate cake. Right? But if you have that time focus, I have to lose a half a pound each week. That's manageable. Whatever that weight is you choose to lose each week.
And that can be tough for, say, parents out there that have a couple of young children at home, are working crazy hours. It can get a little bit more difficult though, yeah?
Yes, it can.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of resources out there. I know of one particular place that they deliver salads. Individual size, family size. And so there are healthier options out there. If you can get your whole family involved, if it's an exercise program, if it's a mindfulness meditation program, or eating more healthy. We'll stick with the eating more healthy because that is, I'm sure a lot of people have that as a New Year's resolution. So for your family, again, drastic changes, especially if you have kids, might not like that so much. So if you introduce maybe a couple of new vegetables each week, don't replace the whole meal because then that's a drastic change, but you add something to each dinner, say twice a week. And then you do that for a few weeks and then you increase it to adding 3 more. So you have that specificity, you have that time bound, you have that realistic, and then you choose foods that taste good, of course.
Hiding vegetables, that's been a big thing for us. I was amazed when I found cauliflower sweet potato tots at the supermarket. Scoop those up.
Yes.
Kids didn't even know the difference.
Yes, you find
Love it.
something that works.
Right. One piece of advice, real quick, that you have for folks out there right now trying to stick with a resolution for 2023.
Make it something that's meaningful to you and that's manageable, something that's realistic that you can achieve by setting those smaller, manageable goals along the way to achieving that resolution.
Good advice, good information. Dr. Holly Traver, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
6 weeks after Election Day, New York's legislature has finally taken shape. We've got results of the last contentious race and what it means for the state Senate. Remember, if you've got a comment or story idea, always let us know. Email EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com or find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. Weeks after Election Day, the results for Senate District 50 are now officially in. Incumbent John Mannion taking the win with just 10 votes. You heard me right, 10 votes to spare. Our Capitol correspondent Amel Talegi has more on what this win means for the New York State Senate.
Over a month ago, there was talk that the state Senate could lose a supermajority in the 63-member chamber, but that's no longer the case. Democratic Senator John Mannion's win against Republican opponent Rebecca Sheroff brings the Democratic tally to 42 members in the state Senate. Exactly how close was the race?
Well, it was close enough that it went to a hand recount. So, the votes were counted, early votes, election day votes, absentee votes, emergency ballots. And then it was under 0.5% of difference. So therefore, it automatically goes to a hand recount.
Mannion, who represents Central New York, says redistricting certainly played into the tight race. He was the only Democratic senator to win in a Republican district this cycle.
Majority of the elected officials that I'm working with are Republicans, almost exclusively, in fact. So therefore, it's all about representing the communities of Central New York, and we're both, regardless of who I'm working with, we're in it to serve the public.
John Caney with Reinvent Albany says part of retaining the supermajority gives Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins more leverage when it comes to negotiations with the governor and the assembly.
Constitutionally, it means that the Senate can override a veto by the governor, but that is very, very rarely done. The most practical import is probably increasing just the clout of the Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and also of the legislature.
Caney says this leaves the governor in a powerful position. Reporting in Albany, Amel Talegi.
Thank you to Amel. Following New York's final Office of Cannabis Management meeting for the year, Governor Hochul announcing the state's first legal dispensary will be opening. The dispensary will open up December 29th down in Manhattan, operated by Housing Works. All proceeds from dispensary sales there go towards a nonprofit, which works to address HIV and homelessness in New York. To date, New York State Cannabis Control Board has approved 36 conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses. Other openings have still not yet been announced. All right, stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. But remember, we'd like to hear your comments and story ideas. Find us on email, EmpireStateWeekly@gmail.com, or seek us out on Twitter. All right, and finally from us here at Empire State Weekly, from bail reform and public safety to school COVID guidelines and the rollbacks, 2022 has certainly been an eventful year for state politics. Rising national inflation met head-on by the suspension of the gas tax at the state and county level here in New York, and the new Hochul administration facing a strong challenge during election season from Republican challenger Lee Zeldin. We'll break down some of the biggest stories of the year with Capitol correspondent Amal Taleji next week. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. We'll see you right back here next week. And remember, you can catch us all over the state of New York. Here's the full schedule of where you can see Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across the state.